Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah, I'm calling your name. Oh Allah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another live episode of Let's Talk on your favorite channel, Huda TV. I'm your host, Arkham Rashid. Remember, this is a live episode, so our phone lines will be open throughout this show so you can join us. So in this episode, we want to speak about popular culture and its effects on people. So let's start off by welcoming and introducing our panel. On my right-hand side, sir, if you can give us your name, where you're from, and a little bit about yourself. Go ahead, inshallah.
My name is Baraka Blue. I'm an artist, poet, hip-hop musician from the Bay Area, California.
All right, Baraka, and this is your first time on the show here with me.
It is.
Well, you're in Egypt for a little bit amount of time. How are you enjoying your time in Egypt so far?
I love it. Beautiful people. I've been told that the Egyptians have the best sense of humor in the whole Arab world, and I find it to be true.
All right, I'm glad you're enjoying your time here. Once again, welcome to the show. Next to him, brother, if you can give us your name, where you're from, and a little bit about yourself. Go ahead and
my name is Yusuf Kroma. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I'm an author, activist, spoken word artist, all around nice guy.
All right, so we got the poets on this side of the panel.
Right.
All right. Yusuf, I'm going to once again welcome you to this panel and the show, inshallah. I'm going to come over to this side. Brother, if we can get your name, where you're from, and a little bit about yourself. Go ahead, inshallah.
My name's Idris. I'm from America, from Maryland, same area as you. I'm here teaching English, studying Arabic, and memorizing Quran at the same time.
All right. We got Maryland, Delaware, and Philadelphia on the show. Next to him, brother, if you can give us your name, where you're from, and a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I'm Omar Khalid, I'm Egyptian, and I work in translation and writing scripts for TV programs.
All right, Omar Khalid, once again, welcome to this panel and this show. This side of the panel, you guys are usually my guests, and we have wonderful conversations, so I'm also looking forward to this conversation here. So coming to this side, let me start with you, Baraka. Let's start with a very simple question so we can kind of lay the foundations for this program. What is popular culture, and what does it mean to you?
Pop culture. A lot of things spring to mind. Michael Jackson, first shot, but that kind of dates myself, so probably for the younger people it would be more like Beyonce or Lil Wayne or Drake. But yeah, popular culture is, in American context, you think of the big Super Bowl halftime and the big fanfare and music, television, and all that. But I was also thinking about the fact that that doesn't necessarily have to be pop culture. So I've had the blessing of traveling a lot, and in some of the places that I went, in very traditional Muslim cultures, pop culture is actually qasidas and nasheeds and remembrance. And the famous people are the shuyukh and the scholars and the righteous people. And I really think that you could tell a lot about a society by the people that are put on a pedestal in that society. Yeah. So who do people look up to, and who are the superstars and the famous people? And so I think, obviously in the West we think of pop culture as something which perhaps has a corrupting influence, or there's a lot of negative, and it's a lot of just heedlessness personified and magnified. But in reflecting on that, I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be that. That's not reflective of all cultures.
So different cultures would have different sort of popular cultures amongst themselves, which would lead to another question, is how is pop culture created? But before I do that, I want to put the first question to Yusuf. Yusuf, if you can tell us, what do you think pop culture is, and what does it mean to you?
I think any culture, and then it was a social construct, so it was like an unspoken agreement between the civilizations of people that reside in society, which is that what is to be done, what is to be said at a particular time and place and a circumstance. And that, it shifts. Something may be popular now, something may be cool now, and tomorrow it's not. So it's a way of dress, it's a manner of speaking, it's, a way of carrying yourself, or, a way of joking. Yeah. So is this something that's unspoken? And once that thing is crystallized by way of repetition, by way of widespread practice, then it becomes popular culture. So I believe it starts in the underbelly of the city, you know, something's happening, and then it becomes practice widespread, then become popular culture, or it starts from the top and it trickles the way down, i.e., Beyonce wears a new wig or something like this, right? She does wear wigs, I think. Right? Or something like this, and there's a new trend. Or somebody wears a new hat, you know, that places it this way, like Baraka's hat is going to go live, right? And they're watching it like, yo, man, I like that hat. And then all the, you know, guys.
Catches the trend.
Exactly.
Creates the trend, actually.
Exactly. So I believe that's, you know, how popular culture is. And it's just, by way of repetition and emulation, it becomes popular culture. Either way, you know, from the bottom up or from
the top.
From the top down.
That's very interesting, actually. I'm going to come over to this side of the panel. Idris, what's your thoughts on this? What do you think popular culture is? And if you want to give us some points on how do you think it's created as well, that'd be good.
For me, I think I'm pretty simple, a little bit of what they're saying, but a different angle. For me, it's popular culture. Of course, it's a culture from an area that's put forth and pushed to be popular by different outlets, whether that be media, whether that be athletes, whether that be someone. They're the ones who are putting forward the idea to push something to be popular, because they're the ones who will influence it to become popular. Not just because I do it, it will become popular, because certain people or certain outlets push it forward to make it popular. And people tend to gravitate toward this. And of course, in the world right now, the West has the power, the influence, so their culture is dominating and going forward, and people are sort of trying to emulate it because they're the ones in power. And that's pretty much for me.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because you can see the effects of that trickling throughout society around the globe. I mean, a lot of the youth around the globe, whatever country they may be from, want to be like Americans or want to be like the British. And you can find that amongst themselves, and that's because of the effects of popular culture. We can, inshallah, get into whether or not popular culture can be used in a good way to influence people as well. But before I do that, Omar, I'm going to get your thoughts on this as well, so you can join the panel.
I just wanted to add just one point. I was reading an article that was talking about America and about the standards of what's right and what's wrong. So it was talking about movies rating, the rating of movies. They were saying that at the time, maybe in the 80s or something like this, some of the scenes that are considered violent at that time will be considered right now, maybe it's something mild and it's nothing. And PG-13 stuff now maybe are not even shown in rated R movies right now. I think it's due to something in psychology also, which is related to desensitization, because we get desensitized to things that are repetitive. Like when we see sex and drug and rock and roll and all of these things, and we get used to them. Like ask a person who is, they are rare, but there are some people, they don't like to watch maybe TV that much. They like reading, they like socializing with the families. Ask them and tell them, what do you feel when you listen or hear, like, for instance, there is a war in a certain place and some civilians dying. Maybe they can cry, maybe they can feel shocked. Most of the people are going to feel like they are weird. Why are they crying? Why are they having these feelings? While this is the normal way of behaving as human beings. So for me, I don't tend to be gloomy or something, but for me, popular culture in general makes us, most of us, don't have feelings. This is maybe...
Okay, that's an interesting point. I mean, that's why this panel is here. You can share your thoughts and whatever you feel about the topic. Now, what I want to ask is, do you guys think that popular culture is always necessarily a bad thing, or can it be a good thing? And if it can be a good thing, how can we use that to influence the youth in a good way? Barak, I'm going to start off with you.
I don't think popular culture necessarily is a negative thing. Although when you say pop culture, I do think of the kind of
negative
heedlessness, like you said, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and all that. But when you guys were speaking, I was reflecting on the fact that, you know, the Muslim Ummah spanned from Africa, Spain, Southeast Asia, Anatolia, China, and all across so much of the world. And when you look at someone like Ibn Battuta, who came as a judge from Morocco, and then he was able to be a judge in all these places, right? Because he studied fiqh, right, in Morocco, but he was able to function, you know, all the way in Southeast Asia. And they talk about European travelers that if they were to leave just a few days from their city, they were in a totally different culture. And it was like, this is, right, Marco Polo talks about how even still in Europe, but outside of his city, it was foreign to him. And so I reflect on, like, there was this kind of global Muslim popular culture, which is, a lot of it is based on the prophetic sunnah. How you treat people, being generous, hosting guests. That was pop culture, in a sense, right? And that was just how people were raised and how people learned about it. And even many people, that I talked to today that are from, Southeast Asia or Pakistan or East Africa, they'll just be like, this is how my family and my culture does things. And then later in life, they'll learn, actually, this was a prophetic sunnah. They'll just think it was their culture, right? So it's the popular culture that actually creates such a beautiful atmosphere and passes on these teachings. So I think pop culture in and of itself is a neutral term. The question is, what is the content of the popular culture?
That's actually very interesting. And to get a specific question, which I'll come back to you for, is that what about Muslims living in the West, like in the US, Europe? The popular culture that affects the Muslim youth, is that always a good thing? And do you think parents should be concerned about that? But before I do that, I'm going to go to Yusuf and put the same question forward, that do you think popular culture is always a negative thing? And why does it seem to have this negative context to it?
No, I think pop culture, like anything else, has its pros and cons. But when I reflect particularly on the climate in the United States, something that's pop culture now is activism.
Yeah.
Right? So you have the Black Lives Matters movement, and people raising arms against the government, fighting the powers that be, disproportionate distribution of wealth and resources, mass incarceration, poor educational systems, just all across the board. And that's popular culture, hashtags. So anything that happens, the youth are active, the youth are ready, they're ready to protest, they're ready to have sit-ins, and that's popular. So I think that's something that's praiseworthy within itself. And those moments within pop culture, I think there are goodnesses that can be taken from those sort of moments within pop culture.
That's very interesting. And something like that, we need to know, how can we create that sort of pop culture? Like you said, going back to, there's so many things that are amongst the culture of many Muslim countries that they didn't know was a prophetic tradition.
Sure.
And when you tell them, being generous, this is actually from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and they're like, wow, this is our culture. But it trickled down from there. Like you said, sometimes pop culture comes from the highest part of society, trickles down to even the lowest parts of society. Idris, I'm going to come over to you on this side. Put the same kind of question to you. Pros and cons, and do you think pop culture is necessarily bad?
I agree in the sense that I don't think it in and of itself is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because as we know, Allah created everything, and everything He created, nothing is 100% bad. Even Iblis gave us a dua that we benefit from to this day. And of course we know the status of Iblis.
Yeah.
So nothing in itself is always bad. It's just, you need to put an Islamic lens through it, to say, a filter through it to figure out what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Because the problem is that a lot of times that we want to use a filter that is not from us to determine what's right and what's not right. We like to use a filter that the West considers, like they would call us sometimes, they love this term to say you're a fundamentalist. In reality, this term 75 years ago wasn't a bad word. But the connotation came from the evangelistic Christians. They started calling them fundamentalists to demonize them. So this term actually came from something good and it turned to bad. Through their lens, through their history, through the things they went through. So we have to learn how to take things for what they are and take the good and leave the bad. This is the problem with a lot of the Muslim West, is that they don't have this lens. And they often end up taking the evil things and leaving the bad. Because they're using the West's lens to determine what's good, what's bad. Which we shouldn't do.
Yeah. And that's exactly, I mean, when you use somebody else's lens, you're basically playing on their playing field. Omar, I want to ask you something very similar. Your thoughts on this, but give us an example from Egypt.
Oh, wow. Okay, I just wanted to start, something popped in my mind regarding, I think it's a quote by Mark Twain. He's an American author. It was something like this: if most people are going somewhere then pause and reflect, because most people, maybe in most time, they are just following something called the herd psychology. When we do something, for
What we
instance,
call sheep.
yeah, because they did so many experiments regarding this. Like, it's a long experiment, but I'm not going to get to it. But it's regarding no, not dogs. I'm not torturing dogs these times. But it was regarding monkeys. If you want me to say it,
not monkey.
okay.
No, you can go ahead, tell the story.
But wait, there's torture in it. So okay. Okay, so the story in the end that they brought 5 monkeys inside a cage, and when they brought something like food from the ceiling of this cage, and when one of the monkeys tried to get this banana or something, they shocked the other 4 monkeys. So what happens that after time, when they see this connection between the monkey getting over a box and getting the banana, this is the reason for this shock. So they stop him. They stop the monkey and bring him down. What happens that the monkey doesn't understand what's happening because he's not on the floor at that time, the floor that he's getting the banana and so on. So they try to change the monkeys and they remove one after the other until 5 monkeys, they are not even they don't know the experiment.
They've never been shocked.
They have never been shocked. And when they see one of the monkeys going up, they follow that's just the pattern. And they just hit the monkey with it. So maybe this is what I wanted to allude to. And regarding the question about Egypt, well, I think most likely, like my brother said, that the Twitter and Facebook and so on and so forth changed so much of the apathy and the misunderstanding of what's right and what's wrong, because now it's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time that some people just lost the hope, lost the trust for authorities and for some of the elder people, because there's a detachment. There's a detachment between them and between youth. So they start to get the information themselves. They start going and read and discuss this with each other and so on.
Yeah, and that detachment that you mentioned, that's what we want to speak about next. Do you think there's sort of a gap of understanding between the youth and their parents' generation, especially in the West, and now hearing this in Egypt as well? I didn't even know this about Egypt. But do you think that gap is there, and do you think that it will affect the way the youth practice their religion, because they don't want to take the religion of their parents? That's not cool. That's not pop culture. And then after we tackle this issue, we'll probably get into how can we create a trend that the youth or the Muslim youth would want to follow. So let's start with this first one. Do you think there's this gap that exists, and how can we overcome this gap? Go ahead, bro.
That's a great question. I think the brother alluded to the fact that in the West, now in the modern world, there are people that are manufacturing culture, right? So there are people, multi-million-dollar companies that are saying, you're part of this demographic, you're part of this demographic. So people think, I like to listen to this, and I like to wear this, and I like to use this slang. But they don't know, actually, they're part of a demographic that lives in a specific neighborhood, in a specific age bracket, in a specific socioeconomic status, and that actually those likes are kind of manufactured by these huge companies. So, okay, there's that going on. And a lot of that is they separate ages. So they're like, you're going to like this music, and then 5 years later, you guys are going to like this, and you're going to like this. And so it does create a definite disconnect. And I think one of the most important things is that there's communication between the age groups. And I really reflect on the fact that in traditional cultures, the elders were honored. That these are our superstars, because these are people that have wisdom and have experience, and we honor them. And in the West, in fact, people dread getting old, right? And old people are trying to look like their children, right? And they're trying to dye their hair, and they're trying to get rid of their wrinkles, and they're trying to dress in the new hip fashion.
I mean, that's part of the pop culture.
Exactly. Right. And it's like my mom has a term for it. She said painfully hip. Like, you're so hip, but it's like just you're trying so hard. And I really feel that we have to be able to really think about the ways that we can nurture a healthy culture, because in some sense, nowadays it's like children are spending more time in front of machines than with their physical family members or even physical friends. And so who's raising who, So these are things that we really need to think about, and we need to question, like, can we just say it's all bad, or do we need to be interacting with these things that youth are interacting with in ways that give a positive outlet or a beautiful representation?
Yeah, and I mean, just that last point there, that's something I completely agree with. I think that we need to understand the popular culture in order for us to appeal to the youth, in order for us to educate them in a better way, because if you're not going to do it, somebody else will. And that popular culture will be there, and that popular culture will take an effect on those children and on the youth. Yusuf, I'm going to come to you. Same kind of question. Something interesting that he mentioned was that there's major players that are deciding who likes what. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. You find in the States, I mean, it's all systematic, and it's so pervasive that you can't escape it. Really, for example, in popular culture music, if there's a certain genre of music that you don't like, right? There's certain rappers I just can't stand. Their message is corrosive, I can't stand it. But I'll be ironing my shirt, and I'll find myself humming the lyrics or something like that. Because, I heard it so much that it's stuck in my mind now. So that's how, it just sticks to you like glue. After a while, you can try to, evade it as much as you can. But after a while, you still take on some of that influence, some of the effects of the popular culture. So in terms of the du'a, I think Islam comes to address the condition of the people. So there was one particular da'i who spent 10 years in a particular region studying, Sharia, studying fiqh and Quran and things like this. And he stayed there for 10 years. He never came back to Philadelphia. So when he came back, he really didn't know how to address the condition of the youth. So for every problem, it was like, you need to learn Tawheed. You need to learn more Quran. You need to memorize the Hadith. And the youth like, nah, man, we can't relate to that. So you didn't know how to address the popular culture and, and address them in a manner that they understood and adjust their particular condition. It's like a doctor who, if you go to the doctor, he just generally looks at your symptoms and give every sick person the same medicine. When really you need medicine on an individual basis and understand the different symptoms, different climates and things like this, so you can give them appropriate medicine for the condition. So I think that in addressing pop culture, our Islamic leaders, our elders, it is necessary to a certain degree for them to understand the conditions that we're living in, the things that we're going through, so that that gap is closed. And at the same time, it's our responsibility as youth to honor the elders for the sake that they're elders. Don't need to put on a hoodie or some skinny jeans for us to say, yeah, I'm going to listen to this elder. They need the respect because they had the experience and they have the credentials and they've been where we've been before. So I think that it's a it's a mutual common ground sort of thing.
Very interesting. Before we continue this conversation, we're going to go for a short break, so stay tuned.
How perfect my Allah is, and I praise Him. Subhanallahi wa bihamdihi, Subhanallah. How perfect you are, Allah. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're hating on each other, we're fighting.
Many people judge Islam based on what the Muslims do. The fact is, Islam is perfect, but the Muslims are not. However, it is not hard for us to implement, and there are ways for us to be the ideal Muslims. Join me, Dr. Rayyan Arab, in this new program, The Ideal Muslim, so that we could discover the ways of how we could be ideal Muslims.
Why are we fighting each other? Life is short, time runs away.
Huda TV strives to remain the premier English language Islamic channel in the world. And to do so, we need your input. Send us your thoughts, suggestions and feedback through email at feedback@hoda.tv. Hoda TV is committed to helping others, so why not help Hoda TV share the message of Islam worldwide? Take part in helping spread the authentic message of Islam based on the Quran and the Sunnah throughout the world by sponsoring Hoda TV. Don't miss this unique opportunity to gain the reward from Allah.
TV commercials motivate viewers into immediate action and to sway consumer loyalty from one brand or service to the other. That's why we're here for you, to help you sell your products and services by using creative ideas that bring life into your own TV commercial. Advertise your business and branded products and services on Huda TV. We will offer you fast-paced and energetic 30-second affordable TV spots. Advertise on Huda TV. Acquire fresh customers and stay within your budget. For more info or to receive a quote, please send your inquiries to advert@Huda TV. Huda TV.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah.
Welcome back to Let's Talk. Now, before we went for that short break, we were speaking about popular culture and its effects on people. Something that we spoke about right before we went for that break was the gap between the older generation and the youth. And how can we close this gap that's between and that's there? Idris, I'm going to start with you. Idris, what I want to know is, do you think there is a gap? And should this gap be closed in order for the elders or the scholars or the people that are preaching to the youth, for them to understand the youth better and to know how exactly they can relate to the youth?
Yeah, I think there is a gap. It's pretty obvious there is. Yeah. And I think that the solution would be, we have precedents in the Sharia and in the history, Tariq of Islam, of this exact same thing, where sometimes people would come from another land and come talk to a scholar and ask him for an opinion, and he would ask them where they're from. And when he found out where they're from, he said, "Do you have people in your area that know better than me?" And some of these were the giants of Islam. That he would think that they probably know the answer, but they would send that person back to the person who's knowledgeable of the area. Ask them. They know your area, your people better than me. But I think the biggest problem is that it's not easy to find an individual who has the ability to still have an understanding of where he's from and still get to a certain level of Islamic knowledge where he can actually, disseminate the Sharia to them. It's not an easy task, because often this person lose balance while seeking the knowledge. They intend to be so engulfed in it, they forget where they're from, they forget the people, they forget the reality.
Similar to the story.
So I live close to Philly, and I've been to Philly plenty of times. I'll give you an example. Some of the things we talked about before, like for instance, some people don't know that, of course he'll laugh because he's from Philly. In Philly, the beard is popular.
Yeah.
You will think everyone's Muslim when you go there, and come to find out it's not. But this is the popular culture from there. So
the Philly beard, they got the Muslim oil and everything.
Exactly. Very big. You'll see it's a lot of people with big beards. It's just a normal fashion thing there. So a scholar may see this and think, oh, mashallah, they really have a lot of people. But in reality, he doesn't understand the culture of the people. And it doesn't mean anything to them. Yeah. Well, to the ones who do it for the reason it means something, but a lot of them doesn't mean what you think it means to them. It's more of just a cool thing. Something that they grew up and this is what they're used to. It's normal for them. So we need people who can put these two together, which isn't an easy thing. So I'm not saying it like as if we're just throwing it out there. It's a difficult thing. You have to keep a balance. Like he said, the guy went away for 10 years. Probably he should have came back and spent some time in his town and with his people, and then go back and forth, so that he doesn't lose the touch with who he is, and he can put the connections together.
Something you mentioned in the beginning was that many times a person might ask a scholar for an opinion or a fatwa, and he would say, "Where are you from?" And if he finds out he's from a different land, he would say, "Go ask somebody there." It reminds me of something we did in Kitab al-Qadi. Where it speaks about the rules on being a judge and what are the conditions. And one of the conditions that was mentioned, and this is a traditional book, was that the person has to understand the culture. It's a shart, it's a condition, meaning this person cannot be appointed as a judge if he does not understand the culture of the people that he will be judging.
Because urf is one of your
exactly, and it's not even something like, well, it'd be good if he understands the culture. It's a shart, meaning he will not be appointed qadi. He will not be appointed the judge of a town or whatever area if he doesn't understand the people and their culture and how they roll. I want to come to you. Oh wait, before that actually, one more thing I wanted to mention, which reminds me, was the Philly beard. And this example is very interesting to me because something like this, for example, whether or not you're keeping your beard for a religious purpose or whatever it may be, or because it's style in your city, but the tolerance is there. So in Philadelphia, if somebody wants to keep a big beard because they're religious, they can, and it's not looked at as something weird. Whereas, let's take Egypt for example, if you keep a big beard, it's looked at as something weird. So that culture is not there, that culture is not created. And that's what we want to address. How can we create a culture where the youth will feel comfortable practicing their religion?
But before you move on, a lot of times the youth are going to have to understand something too. That the Prophet ﷺ told us that we would be strangers, that you would be strange, that you're going to have to deal with it. You don't have to feel like I have to fit in. You're going to have to deal with that. You know what? This is the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what He gave us. And popular culture will sway to the left, sway to the right. But you need to be firm. And does it matter if you're strange today or strange not today? But you need to stick firm to what will get you to Jannah, to what please Allah. If we have that principle, you'll have a better understanding of how popular culture will affect you, and how you react is more important than how it affects you.
Yeah, but the thing I'm trying to aim here is that, or aim for, is understanding that, yes, for example, if the popular culture is against our religion, then you stick to the religion. But if we can make it in a way that both of them line up with each other, then that's what we need to aim for. We need to try to create that culture in which the youth will feel safe and will feel proud and will feel comfortable practicing their religion. Omar, I want to get to you, and let's get some examples from Egypt coming in here.
Well, before saying an example, I remembered something regarding the culture and understanding this when we are a judge. I remember an incident happened to the Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, when at the time, after even the conquest of Mecca and so on, the Prophet said to Lady Aisha that if it wasn't for your tribe and your families, that they are just very close to being disbelievers, I would just deconstruct the Kaaba and just build it again.
Absolutely.
But he wouldn't do this. Why? Because he knows that their culture, they're going to understand, oh, now, he is now changing the culture of his his tribe and so on. So he understands this, and he makes, takes it into consideration. So this is something that we have to take into consideration. About Egypt, I have a general solution in my opinion. To change the culture, you have to change home. This is the first nuclear change. If the house is not changed, then the whole culture is not going to change. What I mean by this is that fathers, and especially fathers, they are isolated from their kids. We don't learn experience about life except from people who just engaged with other people outside in life. So if my father, that happened to me actually. My father lived in another country, and I didn't get to experience with him and so on. So I'm not going to understand the real world around me and what's right and what's wrong and how to deal with the differences and how to stay firm in your principles. And at the same time, you deal with good behavior with people and don't make them feel like reluctant to deal with me and so on and so forth. So the first step here is to have a very good relationship with the sons and daughters, like the father and the mother, of course, to get closer to them and to know that we understand you. We understand
to close that cultural gap.
Yes. This is the beginning, before knowing the scholars, because the scholars, we know them when we are older, when we are maybe after being teenagers and so on, getting to the critical age. So it starts at home. It's my
education starts at home. Okay, the next thing we want to tackle, and this is probably the last issue that we'll be able to speak about on this show at least, is how can we create a trend for young Muslims to follow, and how can we kind of counter the bad popular culture, we can say. Baraka, if you can start us off.
That's a great question. I read a paper called Islam and the Cultural Imperative by Dr. Omar Abdullah, who's an American scholar. And he used an amazing analogy. He said, Islam is like a pure spring on the top of a mountain. And as it flows through different lands, it maintains that pure water, but it takes on the color of the bedrock that it flows over. So if it's red clay, you see the red culture. And if it's blue rocks, it takes on a blue color. So he said in West Africa, Islam looks African. In Southeast Asia, it looks Southeast Asian. And that's a beautiful thing. And he mentions that the Prophet ﷺ was not culturally predatory. In other words, he didn't look at different cultures and say, that's not us, that's not this. In fact, it's mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, when he went to different tribes that would braid their hair, he would braid his hair like them to honor them. Or when he went to tribes that spoke in a different Arabian dialect, he would speak like them to honor them. And there's many other stories like that. So one thing is that, but at the same time, Islam obviously doesn't just say everything's cool, everything goes, right? There's a furqan. So anything that is in it, but basically the default is things are good unless they go against the sacred law. And you know, one of the things that's fascinating is we're talking about pop culture, and we think about, in America and probably in the world, we think about hip-hop music. And so much of hip-hop is associated with negative things, you know, heedlessness, you know, lower desires, money, greed, violence. And in many ways it's been weaponized. But I kind of come from an era, and probably some of the brothers here, in which a lot of the hip-hop was actually very conscious and very positive. And actually Islam was very central. So the first time I heard the word Allah was in a hip-hop song. In Wu-Tang Clan, right? And then, you know, the reason that I read the autobiography of Malcolm X is because all the rappers that I looked up to were talking about Malcolm, were wearing X hats, were sampling his voice in the records, they had his face in the music video. And I was embarrassed as a young kid, 14, 15, that I didn't know who he was, because that's who the rappers were talking about. And so then I read his book. And these were very central to my entering Islam. And so, you know, but now you see how, of course, hip-hop, like I said, has been weaponized, and it's, you know, being used as a tool to lead people astray. So I'm saying a lot of stuff because it's not necessarily simple, like how do we do that, but we have to look at culture as positive, as good in and of itself, but then those things which go against the haqq and go against what, you know, the deen has taught us, that we then kind of purify it. Islam is to purify things, but it's not necessarily against. And a lot of times I think, you know, people in the Eastern lands, in the Muslim lands, they see Western culture as either like so enticing that they just love it, right? Everyone's wearing blue jeans. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times they take the worst aspects of our culture. You know, they don't take the good aspects, because there is a lot of good in Western culture, but they take the negative. And so, you know, I think the key is that we know our text well and we know our context well, which is what essentially the brother was saying, that we know the deen well and then we know our culture well, because then we won't get confused. It won't be so difficult to sift through. But again, that takes some real literacy, some real education. And like you also mentioned, it takes some real cultural context. Because if you come from a strong family, and then by extension a strong community, a strong masjid or what have you, then you're going to have some immunity to the negative effects of culture. But if you don't have, if no one taught you how to be a man, how to be a woman, how to treat people, how to respect people, what type of things we should be looking at and listening to in a beautiful way, then all that stuff is you're gonna have no immunity to it, and it's just gonna, you know, sweep you away.
Yeah, and very interesting that you mentioned that. I love the analogy you gave in the beginning of your speech here. One thing very important is that Islam didn't come to destroy culture. And that's what many people get wrong. What they do is, okay, now you want to start practicing Islam, so first thing you do is what? Put on a thobe. You think that's going to make you a religious Muslim.
Or a shalwar kameez.
Exactly, or anything that looks like, you know, something that a Muslim would wear. But that's not what Islam is. Islam didn't come to destroy your culture. It didn't come to Arabize your culture. It didn't come to do anything to your culture. The only thing it came to do is that those aspects of your culture that are not good, it came to change those. So, for example, when the Prophet ﷺ and the early companions, when they converted to Islam, the Prophet ﷺ didn't tell them, okay, now that you're Muslim, right, we're going to wear a different thobe. No, they continued wearing what they wore. What did they change? How did people recognize that that person is Muslim now? Because the mushrikeen, they were able to tell, okay, this person has taken the religion of Muhammad. How?
Behavior.
There you go. The person's character and his manners changed. Not the way he dressed. He didn't wear a different thobe that the person said, okay, you see that thobe? That's the Ummah of Muhammad thobe. That's not what it was. It was his behavior, his manners. This person used to cheat. Now he doesn't cheat. When this person used to sell, he used to rip people off and lie. Now he doesn't lie. He's taken the religion of Muhammad. That's how they told, and that's what we need to do. When you want to become practicing, you don't need to change the way you dress. You don't. I mean, obviously, unless it's something inappropriate in Islam itself. But generally speaking, if you wear jeans and you wear a shirt, you don't need to throw on a thobe. And but you need to change your behavior, your character, the way you interact with people, and that's what the difference is.
Just real quick.
Of course.
This is why in Islam that your behavior, adab and akhlaq, will be so heavy on the scale of judgments. More so because if you did all the salah, you did all of these things that benefit yourself, it benefits you. But when you do, have proper manners and adab, akhlaq, and all of these things, you don't affect yourself. Adab doesn't affect me. It affects everyone else. That's why on the Day of Judgment, a lot of people are going to find themselves in trouble. They're going to be in a lot of trouble because their behavior will overshadow that they prayed all their 5 prayers. It will overshadow that they did this, because it's a huge thing. So.
You're going to be bankrupt.
Yes, muflis.
Did you just say taxi drivers? Yusuf, I'm going to come over to you. What's your thoughts on this as well? How can we create, or sort of create, because obviously creating a trend it's a whole conversation itself, or probably even more. But how can we start to counter bad influence?
Yeah, I think if you look at the prophetic tradition, and that when at the advent of Islam, the Prophet ﷺ went to who? The most influential people within Mecca. So he went to the people of influence. So within any type of culture, any society, people emulate people of influence, people that have, whether it's wealth, whether it's power, whether it's just, you're just somebody that's known. So you utilize people of influence, and within the communities, those should be our Islamic leaders. So for example, one of the key reasons I'm even here, I even consider Ashar, was a graduate of Ashar that was back, I met in LA. And when I saw the brother, he was dressed very, very well. Like, almost out of a GQ magazine, like fresh, right? So I'm like, yo, this dude, like, there's something about him. He's like, very, well put together. There's something nice about him. And then later, after speaking with him, I found out like maybe a day later that he was an Ashar graduate. He was an alim as well. So I was, automatically drawn into him, his character, by the way he treated me. And then I found out later that he was a person of knowledge. By that point, I was already in. I was already influenced by his character without him even telling me, read this hadith, read this anything. I already wanted to know what he was about. So by just being a person of influence, by having good akhlaq, and also being a little bit sharp too, it doesn't hurt. You can influence society by being a person of influence. So if we can, alhamdulillah, take these people that are in societies, whether they're artists or authors, people that have influence, and help them, enable them to, sort of work on that akhlaq, as opposed to demonizing them for something that they may have, a rap or something like that, you don't like a lyric, enable them to accept Islam, people of influence, those are the people that can have massive impact. As opposed to demonizing culture, sometimes you refine it. If something, like you said, not everything is 100% bad. So if an individual has some bad characteristics, we refine those. We don't say, we're done with you completely. We help you refine those characteristics, and then you will enable you to influence other people. Because I may have better characteristics than you, but if I don't have that network, if I don't have that outreach, if I don't have the influence, it won't do that, it won't be that much influential as if it's someone else had those same qualities and could just refine the little things that they had and fixed it, they will be far more influential.
Yeah, unfortunately that brings us to the end of our episode, but before I do that, I just want to comment. Something interesting you said was that, people look up to these people, and what comes to my mind is parents. Parents are the first people that a child looks up to. And if parents start off with this good behavior, like you mentioned earlier, then it starts off in the home. Education starts from the home. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys for joining me on my panel today. We had a wonderful conversation. I was satisfied. And dear viewers, I hope you guys enjoyed today's conversation. Join us for many more episodes. And don't forget to check out our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Until then, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How perfect my Allah is, and I praise Him. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, Subhanallah. Subhanallahi wa bihamdihi, Subhanallahi al-azim. How perfect you are, Allah. Subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah, Allah. Subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah, Allah. I'm calling your name, Allah. I call you, I need you, Allahu Akbar, Allah. Your mercy is great.